His lachlak, his quist qua Peter Mahoney, chin stitz chin shennen twa chat elet management. Stimilguis, hinumet qua Peggy Mahoney, hin pipet qua Pete Mahoney, hin chichaya qua Marlene Means, in kinet qua Edith Zachary. Hello, my friends. My name is Peter Mahoney. I'm a Coeur d'Alene tribal member, and I work in the lake management department. My mom is Peggy Mahoney. My father is Pete Mahoney. My mother's mother was Marlene Means, and my father's mother was Edith Zachary. I'm the manager for the Cultural Resources Protection Program in Lake Management for the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, and I'm also blessed to be able to serve on our health board and on our Natural Resources Committee. So I wear a few different hats for the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, and I'm here today to talk to you guys about some of the ways we go about preserving some of our cultural resources within the reservation and among our people. So as I'm going through this presentation, there's some things I want you guys to think about. The main one being, you know, the broad spectrum of cultural resources and what cultural resources are. And I hope that if you don't know or have any ideas about what those might be right now, I really hope that by the end of the presentation, you'll have a vague idea of what cultural resources are. I want you to think about how cultures change and evolve over time. That's a pretty big theme in this presentation. And then how cultural evolution repurposes cultural resources. So a resource might mean one thing to the Coeur d'Alene tribe 200 years ago, but due to changes in our culture, its needs might have shifted, or the way we use that resource might have shifted to the way we use it in modern times. So what is culture? On the right, you'll see this cultural iceberg. And, you know, they say when it comes to icebergs that 10% is above the water, and that's what you see. But then 90% of that iceberg is below the water. And it's really the same thing with culture. You know, the visible culture, the things that you see might be historical figures we talk about, the way people talk, the way they act, the way people dress, traditions and customs. But then the things that, unless you're a member of that culture, things you don't necessarily see or have privy to would be how those people view the world, their attitudes, the values that they like to represent and enact every single day. And really, there's more than one type of culture for any group of people, but for the Coeur d'Alene tribe, in my mind, I see it broken down into three different ones. So we have our historic culture, and that's the way that we lived, you know, I guess pre-colonization. So the things we did, the activities we did, the things we ate, the way we talked, our seasonal calendar. And then we have our modern culture, which is the way we talk and dress and behave and eat today. And then there's this idea of pan-Indian culture. So people who aren't really familiar with Native Americans or the different tribes might think that there's only one type of Native American, when in reality, there's hundreds of different tribes, and they all have different languages and behaviors and oral stories. Each tribe is individualistic. They have their own ways of being. And, you know, we try to move away from that idea of pan-Indian culture, that we all do the same things and act the same way and have the same language. So what are cultural resources? NRCS describes cultural resources as tangible remains of past human activity. And so it's really just a focus on artifacts and then places, like physical places of being. But here at the Coeur d'Alene tribe, we like to take this cultural landscape approach, where we look at not just those artifacts, but we look at culture in its entirety. And so that can mean a lot of different things. So the cultural landscape approach, it integrates environmental science with historical, archaeological, and traditional knowledge. It recognizes cultural heritage resources that can have multiple meanings and levels of significance. And it also changed with how people in different periods of time interact with those resources. It looks at things that are not just tangible, things that you can pick up and feel, but it also looks at things that you can't really quantify, the intangible aspects. This right here is our Coeur d'Alene tribal calendar. Historically, I guess we called ourselves the Chi'itz people. Coeur d'Alene's a more modern name for ourselves. But here we have our seasonal calendar. It was developed a few years ago between Lake Management and Marine and Health and a couple other tribal departments. And it shows the different seasons that the Coeur d'Alene people recognize. So starting at the top and moving to the right, we have spring, summer, fall, late fall, and then winter. And then there's an orange band inside, and that shows the different foods or activities we would have been doing during those seasons. So for example, under set copse, under spring, you'll see some different flowers, and those actually represent the roots of those flowers, because those are the foods we would have been gathering at that time of year. And then Yalst, summer, you'll see the different berries and things that are available under that. But then you go to that very center ring, the very middle of that circle, and you'll see Coeur d'Alene Lake. Coeur d'Alene Lake is at the center of this calendar because it's the heart of our people, the spoos of our people. And we traveled the waterways that connected to that lake historically to go to our different places to hunt and fish and gather. Our livelihoods were very well connected to the lake and the resources that were very plentiful around it, but then also the resources that were found, adjacent to it. And we used it to travel to those places. And this right here is just a really good example of taking indigenous knowledge and putting it in a more modern way of looking at it. So all this information historically would have been handed down orally, but here we have this really cool informational calendar, vocabulary lists of the moons that we can show in classrooms and use for educational purposes today. So it takes natural resources science and blends it with indigenous knowledge. Cultural evolution. So cultures evolve and change over time. Culture's never stagnant. Like the great St. Joe River, it's always flowing, it changes. So on the left, right there, you'll see our modern dugout canoe Warch. I like to use the canoe as an example of cultural evolution because the canoe and its uses have changed over the different generations for the Coeur d'Alene people. Historically, we used it for travel, we used it for hunting, we used it for gathering. In the 1800s, when the Coeur d'Alene people started to do a lot more farming, we used it for commerce, to transport grain across the lake and to different places to sell it. And then today, we use it as a way to get our people connected back with the water. We use it as a way to have different journeys, ways to keep our people really active and just increase our physical activity. So as our culture has changed, the way we use a cultural resource like the canoe has also changed. And then on the right, you'll see this is a piece of artwork called Resistance by Andy Everson. This piece of artwork isn't Coeur d'Alene. It's coastal, but it takes a blend of modern pop culture in Star Wars and then blends it with an indigenous art form. So that's another way that cultures evolve and change, and we can make anything Coeur d'Alene. We just have to figure out ways to adopt it. So here's some time period examples. So on the right, you'll see a couple of our traditional types of houses. So there's that conical lodge, that teepee-shaped one to the left in the photo, and then on the right, you'll see the lean-to, and that lean-to would have been the Coeur d'Alene people's summer housing or temporary housing. If the weather's pretty mild, it's not very bad, we can just pop up a tule mat lean-to that'll provide us some shade, some cover from the wind, maybe some cover from the rain. And then on the left, you'll see our brand new youth center here on the reservation, the Coeur Center, and it takes that same design from that lean-to and then incorporates it in a modern way. And so a lot of times our newer buildings, so the pavilion over at the golf course, I think Senweech in the Elder Center, and now the Coeur Center takes a traditional form of architecture, the shapes that we would have used, and then adapts it to a more modern time. So let's talk about tangible cultural resources. These are things like historical places, artifacts, natural resources, so things like plants and animals. And then I like to include people in this. People are really important cultural resources, especially elders, because they hold a lot of important historical and traditional knowledge that needs to get passed down towards to younger generations. And intangible cultural resources, things like oral stories or knowledge or belief systems or values. These are things that we know exist. We know they're important to our culture, but there are things that are really hard to quantify. Oral stories specifically really connect us to Coeur d'Alene Lake. We have stories about how Coyote turned the lake blue and how Coyote made the Coeur d'Alene people and all the surrounding tribes. But then within each of those stories, there's different variations of them. And those variations can be found even just between families and clans within the Coeur d'Alene people. So different families might tell the same story, but they tell it in a different way, which is, I'm sure it exists in other tribes, but I think that's extremely cool. So now we kind of get into why the program I work for exists. And that is a direct correlation to the impacts of the Post Falls Dam and the damage that's been caused to the lake and the surrounding areas due to that change in water levels that happens every single year. You know, it's a lot lower during the winter, and then it rises up to that high pool of 21, 28 during the summer. And with that water falling and rising, we see impacts on ecosystems for important cultural resources like cutthroat trout and water potatoes. We see the banks of rivers and the lake eroding. So here we get into some impacted cultural resources. So on the left, we have a cutthroat trout, a really important food source to the Coeur d'Alene tribe that's been negatively impacted by the falling and rising of the lake level. And on the right, we have the skeegweets, water potato, which is a really important root to the Coeur d'Alene people. It was probably the last traditional food we really gathered before we went into our lodges for the wintertime. And those are little tubers that grow in wetlands surrounding Coeur d'Alene Lake. Here we're going to look at water levels. On the left, you'll see the historical water levels of Lake Coeur d'Alene. That light green shaded area is the forested and shrub wetland, and the blue would be the deeper water, the open waters. And now on the right, that's the current state of the lake. So that light green area is that same forested wetland, and you can see that it's really been reduced from what it was historically. And that blue and pink area shaded in, those are the deeper water, the open water spots. So what happened was, for that historical map, those green areas, that's where we could historically harvest things like water potato. So when you look at how much green has been reduced on the right photo, that a big portion of the area we used to gather those tubers is underwater for a good portion of the year. And that erosion has caused, I guess, different sediments and things like that to build up that really just make it harder for the water potato to thrive like it used to, and it makes it harder for us to access those areas. And then also those deeper water spots that we have now, a lot of that submerged wetland has become really good breeding and spawning habitat for species like pike that end up being predators of cutthroat trout. So we see how the submerging of these wetlands has impacted two really important cultural resources to the Coeur d'Alene tribe. So that spawned the creation of the Cultural Resources Management Plan for the Coeur d'Alene tribe, which was originally developed in 2012 to address cultural resource impacts caused by erosion. In 2014, the tribal council came to the conclusion that it needed to be revised to focus more on traditional lifeways teaching things like our value system, our language, traditional activities, just a way to carry on that knowledge to future generations so that we don't lose that type of cultural resource. We can't necessarily stop the lake level from falling and rising and the impacts that are caused by that. So we needed to find a way to use those dollars to reach our people in a really meaningful way. So we revised that plan, and now we have the Cultural Resource Protection Program as it is today, where we focus more on getting people involved in traditional ways. So we go about, protecting our cultural resources in a variety of ways. One of the main ones would be education and outreach. We do a lot of presentations, not just at our local school systems here on the reservation, but up in Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls, places like that. We do a lot of different community activities and events. We focus extremely heavily with the youth programs that are here on the reservation. So our local Boys and Girls Club, U of I Extension, Success Center at Plummer Worley School District. We do curriculum development, so we can nail down ways that we can teach these important skills to our people. We do a lot of preservation of artifacts, so we can we can catalog these things and save them for future generations. And with the onset of COVID, we've really started working on multimedia projects so we can capture this important historical information. So community activities. Two of our really important community activities we do or try to do yearly, kind of derailed in 2020, but we have our Lake K celebration on June 18th of every year. And that's just a celebration of the tribe's court victory that affirmed us in our ownership of the southern part of Coeur d'Alene Lake. We try to incorporate a lot of traditional activities into that event. We do stick game, canoe races. We just have canoes ready for people to hop in and paddle them. We did a really cool 3D archery course last year. And then for younger kids, we offer things like bouncy houses. But it's just a nice day to be at the lake with your family, with your people, and to reconnect with that resource. We also do a lot of canoe building. So in 2015, our people, we hadn't built traditional canoes in close to 100 years. So we brought in a local expert who taught 6 of our families how to build canoes. And that program really took off. Besides last year, we've been able to offer family canoe building activities for anywhere from 3 to 6 families. So in 2015, we had 0 canoes and 0 canoe builders in our community. And now I think we've built over 30 canoes, and we have 12 or 15 people that could really just go out and harvest the things they needed and build a canoe if they wanted to, which is just amazing because, now that traditional knowledge exists within that many people, and they're going to be able to share that knowledge with their families, with their kids, with their grandkids. Just recently, we actually started building a dugout canoe down at the tribal school with the 7th and 8th graders, and that's been a lot of fun. We're hoping to have that done and in the water this summer. Some of our activities are based on what seasons. So obviously things like berry harvesting happens during the summer. Hunting is going to happen during the summer and fall and maybe the early part of the winter. But then some things like the simply telling oral stories, coyote stories. So historically our people told these oral stories when we went into the lodge for the winter. We were in the lodge for those long days. We had harvested all the food we needed to survive for the winter. And so this was a time when those stories were really exchanged with younger generations. And part of that was because we were now in close proximity. It's a good way to pass the time. It's a good way to keep kids engaged. But then we're also taught that Coyote's asleep during the winter. And he's a trickster. So if he's asleep, he's not going to hear you talking about him, and he's not going to go out and to play games with you and pick on you. So that was a good time for us to tell coyote stories. And we carry that tradition on, to this day. We'll have multiple coyote storytelling events on the reservation during the winter months. So I've already kind of talked about canoe building. On the left, you'll see an elder and her grandchild, in the process of building a canoe. The top right, you'll see one of our tribal members and some younger members of her family actively paddling a canoe on Canoe Journey. And then those bottom 2 pictures on the left were from a couple summers ago. We worked with the Forest Service to identify white pine trees up by Fernan. And, historically, we didn't really have canvas. So we encased our canoe frames in different barks. So white pine bark was one of the main ones, and birch bark. So you'll see us stripping the bark off that log. And then on the bottom right, that's the finished white pine bark sturgeon nose canoe. That was the first traditionally built canoe by Coeur d'Alene tribal members in around 100 years. So that was really special to be a part of that activity. Canoe Journey. We do multiple canoe journeys every year. The first one is in June, and that's a collaboration between all the Ucut, Upper Columbia United Tribes. So we get together with the Spokanes, Colvilles, Kootenays, Kalispels, and then we take a journey up to Kettle Falls. And that was a really important historical fishing place, historical trading place. And that journey lands, in coordination with the summer solstice and the idea that that's when the salmon would have been returning to that spot and we could start fishing. And then we also do a Canoe Journey in July every year, where we start down here at Camp Larson, or sometimes on one of the St. Joe campgrounds, and then we'll travel up and land at Coeur d'Alene Beach the Friday that July Amps Powwow is starting. So that's a really cool event. It's a local event. It's a way we can get our younger people involved for a day, an afternoon, or a few days. So it's really awesome to be able to offer not just a canoe journey, but multiple canoe journeys. And then this year, with the completion of that youth canoe, we're hoping to offer a couple of youth journeys as well. We really want to, plant these seeds within kids at a young age that they're able to go out and do these traditional activities like canoe journey, basket making, learning language, harvesting berries and roots and animals. We want them to know what that feels like and know how to do it at a younger age, so they're more likely to do it as adults. And that brings us to youth programming. Youth programming, working with the various youth programs we have, like Boys and Girls Club, are extremely important. They create an environment for intergenerational sharing. So we're able to take knowledgeable elders or adults within our community and then get them involved with the youth, teaching them how to do these traditional activities. And that when you're doing these activities, like root gathering, once the teaching portion of showing these kids what they're looking for is over, it's just a really awesome time to share life knowledge. It's a really good opportunity for those kids to connect with adults in their community, people that really care about them and want to see them succeed, and help build up those support systems for the youth. They help facilitate development of a Coeur d'Alene identity. So these kids not just knowing that they're Native American, but knowing that they're Coeur d'Alene, knowing their stories about how Coyote took the heart of the gobbler monster and put it next to Coeur d'Alene Lake and made the Coeur d'Alene people, knowing that Lake Coeur d'Alene is blue because the rock monster was covered in huckleberry juice and fell into the lake and it all washed off them. Connecting who they are as Coeur d'Alene people and knowing where their families came from within the Aboriginal territory. Promotes traditional knowledge and activities. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we can take almost any activity and culturally adapt it to make it more Coeur d'Alene. So take an example would be children's games, things like red light, green light. We can turn that into Quinn and Quoll. And so they're learning some language while they're doing a game they're already familiar with. We've done duck, duck, goose, and changed that into scorpum, scorpum, motsp, which is flower, flower, bee. We also organize different, sometimes day-long activities with the Boys and Girls Club. So we do huckleberry picking every year. This last year was a little bit different. We broke it up into 2 days and had smaller groups, but we go up to different places, sometimes on the reservation, sometimes off the reservation within the Aboriginal territory, and we'll just pick huckleberries and we'll hang out and we'll have lunch. Depending on where we're at, we might go for a swim. So it's just a really fun way to get kids interacting with the outside world, but also show that as a people we were never just confined to this reservation, this 345,000 acres. The Aboriginal territory was 5 million acres or more historically, and so we want kids to know that these invisible borders that have been imposed upon us don't really matter. We want them to know that that's their territory too. That's where their families might have been from. That's where people lived. So it's important to have a relationship with those lands as well. So there's some resources I used to put this together. The top one would be, and I'll send these links out to you guys, but that top link really outlines what cultural resources are from a tribal perspective, from an indigenous perspective. The second link is NRCS, and that's the kind of outdated definition of what cultural resources are. And then those bottom 2 links, those are YouTube links to kind of show some of the things that we've been up to. One of them is called Boss the Lake, and it's a really cool short mini documentary on like recapturing our tribe's canoe culture over the last, I guess it's been 6 years now. And then there's another documentary in there that talks more about the tribe's battle to reclaim the lake, and it deals with things like pollution from the Silver Valley and the various court cases we've had are talked about in there in a little bit greater length. So that was kind of a quick overview of what we do from the Coeur d'Alene tribe's perspective to protect our cultural resources.
Are non-Coeur d'Alene people able to participate in your events?
Our community events that I described, they're open to anyone in our community. Water Potato Day has a lot of people that come down that aren't tribal members. For our canoe build, we've had some non-natives build canoes in the past. The lake celebration is open to anyone that knows about it. You know, our community events don't get cut off just based on tribal enrollment. They're open to the community, and you know, the more people that know about the Coeur d'Alene people, know about our culture, I think that really facilitates important conversations around us growing together as a community.
Could you please explain the effect of lake level on cutthroat trout again?
Cutthroat trout have been impacted by a lot of different issues around the lake. And one of those issues is the fact that those wetlands that we had historically are kind of submerged underwater. And that caused more spawning ground for fish that are predators of cutthroat trout. And so we see a big increase in like pike population since they were introduced in the 70s. And then it also kind of takes away some of that habitat that the cutthroat trout need. There's a lot of other things that have impacted cutthroat trout over the last 100 years, from people dynamiting cutthroat trout up the St. Joe River. So there are definitely a lot of issues beyond lake elevation that affect that species specifically, but that's just one of the species impacted by the lake level.
Have settlement funds been used to acquire and or rehabilitate lands where native plants can be grown and harvested?
So part of our settlement with Avista was that we had to purchase a certain amount of acres of wetlands and associated uplands. And so the tribe has been pretty active in purchasing properties in and around the lake. We have a few project sites where we hope to introduce more things like tules and water potatoes in the future. So tribal members and community members will have the opportunity to dig those, and you know, we'll have more prolific grounds to do that. So yeah, the tribe's been purchasing properties and then doing some restoration activities on those to make sure that those cultural resources remain available and are more available going into the future.
Let's see. Can you talk a little bit about the different language preservation efforts from the Coeur d'Alene tribe, and also what are you doing to preserve the language? Those are kind of similar questions.
So my program doesn't necessarily do specific language activities. The tribe has a really nice language department that's part of our culture department. And they have classes in Plummer Worley School District, in the tribal school. They do, I think they have some Zoom classes they've been doing since the pandemic started that are available to the community. I think we do a lot of different things in our community as well to just make words, you know, more open and out there. Any word that we can put out into the open really increases the Coeur d'Alene vocabulary. So recently, within the last few years, our clinic on the reservation, formerly Benwell Medical Center, changed its name to Mariman Health. And Mariman in the Coeur d'Alene language means to treat. We used a traditional word kind of involving medicine, and then we adapted it to our healthcare facility. You'll see Coeur d'Alene language on some of the street signs we have down here. We also put some of our historical figures as names for streets, which is really cool. Our language program is alive and well. We have some awesome young language teachers that are doing everything that they can to make the language more available to people. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of that in our youth. Our youth programs, our Boys and Girls Club of the Coeur d'Alene tribe, the staff members for that program take language lessons as well so that they can incorporate language into their lessons with the youth.
So there's a question, the Post Falls Dam impacted the tribe. Is there a way that the Post Falls area can honor the villages along the Spokane River?
That's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
There's the park right next to Post Falls Dam, Camelin Park, and Camelin in the Coeur d'Alene language means the throat. And that's what our people have called that area for thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years, as long as we've been in this area. It's kind of hard to really put into words how people can go about honoring different Coeur d'Alene tribal villages. I think it's really important for people to go and just be cognizant of the fact that, if you live in Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls, Moscow, Cheney, you're on traditional Coeur d'Alene territory, and some of those territories overlap with other tribes. If I could just stress one thing to people, it's just to be respectful of that fact, that people have been here in this area living life for tens of thousands of years. And the way the area has looked, it's changed a lot over that time span. But this whole area is Coeur d'Alene country. It's really important to our people. We have historical names for all these different areas. It's really just hard for me to put into words how special all these different places are and how important it is to me that I share that with my kids and younger members in my family. And if people could just be respectful and cognizant of the fact that they're living in Coeur d'Alene territory, living in places that we didn't necessarily want to leave, but we were forced into a position where we had to, move onto the reservation, whether that was through conflict or if it was through choice. Everyone's living in places where there's been a native person before them. Just be cognizant of that fact.
Yeah, that's a really important reminder. Are there any cooperative projects with parks, trails, and signage with the park system in Post Falls? Some of the Post Falls parks are leased from Avista. So is there any partnership between the tribe and Avista on those parks?
I'm not entirely sure about those parks in Post Falls. I know that the tribe, coordinates with the state to maintain the Trail of the Coeur d'Alenes, which is the bike trail that goes from Plummer over to the Silver Valley. And then we have some cooperative agreements with like the U.S. Forest Service, where they help us identify important cultural resources like white pines or cedar logs to build canoes. So we have partnerships with other entities like that, but I'm not entirely sure about that park system specifically.
There's a question. You mentioned there's nothing you can do about the fall and rise of the lake. If that is because of the dam, why is there nothing you can do? And then they said, sorry, I'm guessing that's a loaded question.
Well, we're doing things to, make up for the fact that we can't stop the lake level from falling and rising and impacting the cultural resources that are in the lake system. And, the Coeur d'Alene Tribal Council realized that, only Cullen Sutton, I think, can stop the lake level from rising and falling if he wanted to. So now we just take this approach of choosing to use those funds towards education of our people and community members instead.
How does the tribe connect with NIC and also HREI, the Human Rights Education Institute?
The tribe's done some collaborative work with NIC in the past. We actually have a statue for Morris Antelope that I think is on the North Idaho campus at this moment, and he was an important tribal leader. You'll see some Coeur d'Alene names attached to some of the buildings, like the gym has one on there, and I think the sub has a Coeur d'Alene name attached onto it as well. HREI, I'm not entirely sure about, but I can probably provide a list of resources to help track down the answers to these questions to Maria to send out to you guys.
How old are the oldest tangible artifacts from the Coeur d'Alenes?
So those oldest tangible artifacts that we have date back. We got some things in the archive that bordering on 10,000 years old. We also, we have names for places. This kind of goes into intangible. We have names for places around the reservation and in our Aboriginal territory. And those names for those places, we no longer have the information around those names or how they got those names. So there's information here that, the Coeur d'Alene people have been here naming things, like living in places for a very, very, very long time.
There's a question here asking about replanting of water potatoes and camas. So I know you mentioned water potatoes kind of already, but does the tribe do replanting of camas? And also, are there wetland specific restoration projects based on your cultural resources?
So we've done a lot of camas planting over the last 5 years, and even before that, different programs within the tribe, like the wildlife program, actually gathers local camas seed to be put on different restoration areas that we have. We actually did a camas planting right behind my office a few years ago. Really cool. When camas first sprouts, you plant it as a bulb. It's I think it's in the tulip family, but when the first time it grows out of that bulb, it just looks like a blade of grass. And so we had hundreds of bulbs that didn't really look like they did anything. They just blended in with the grass. And last year, a lot of those flowers really bloomed, and it was just, it solidified the work that we had put in that area, just to see that cultural resource is there again. So that was really cool.
Amazing.
We have some restoration sites that we're building cultural resources like tules and water potatoes into the management plan moving forward. So yeah, that's alive and well. Anyone who's interested in learning more, if you could send them my email address, that'd be great.
Great.
pmahoney@cdatribe-nsn.gov.
Perfect. Yep. So if anybody has questions, you can reach Peter through that or through me, and we can get those questions to him. Okay, I'm not seeing any others come through. So if anybody has any last minute questions, send them in. Otherwise, thank you so much, Peter. This was really great. We really appreciate your time and all that you're doing for our area. It's amazing work. So thank you. I'm going to share my screen.
All right. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to get on here and speak. It's cool. This is a really big part of my job, is being able to do education and outreach like this. And it's just been really hard since the pandemic hit. And so it's nice to have that opportunity. A couple people that helped me in gathering information for the presentation would be Dr. John Firehammer from the Coeur d'Alene Tribe Fisheries Department, Cameron Hauser, our wildlife program manager, and then Ben Schofield from Lake Management provided me with some of the information on water potatoes. So big shout out to those guys for contributing and helping me bring this presentation to you guys.
Helps to have a solid team. Well, thank you so much, Peter. We really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining in. Again, just a reminder that we do have presentations on Tuesday and Thursday. And if you haven't registered, please do. And thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.